it's nice to have people around, definitely, to motivate you.
That gives you kind of like the comfort of, oh, someone's going through the same issue as me.
It made me feel like we were all in the same boat and we all felt the same. I didn't feel like I was just alone in the process.
And sometimes all it takes is one person to word something slightly different, and then all of a sudden it all clicks in your head.
Hello, I'm Kritika Adatia, and I'm a chartered accountant. I now support accountancy students through their training. And as an educator, I'm regularly up close and personal with some of the common issues people face while studying for and sitting their accountancy exams. So in this series for the ACCA, I'm chatting to experts about strategies we can all use when facing some of life's challenges. And this week, we're looking at one of the key supports that many of us instinctively turn to when we're facing obstacles in life: our friends and family. What does it mean when we say humans are social animals? How does having strong social networks help us accomplish tasks and deal with challenges? And if we're feeling isolated, what steps can we take to improve our social relationships and our sense of community? This is On Your Marks, because you'll never know until you try. We hear it all the time. Humans are social creatures, and having a network and support system can make all the difference when we're struggling. For me personally, I find it really difficult to talk about emotions and ask for help when I'm having a hard time. When I was doing the equivalent strategic professional level exams, for ages I kept things bottled inside and got really stressed. It was only later, when talking to other students, did I realise we were all feeling the same way. So with me today to talk about how our relationships can help us when we're facing tough challenges, I've got Dr. Anna Machin. Anna is an evolutionary anthropologist who has spent her career studying the science of close human relationships, including writing 2 books on the subject. So Anna, when we say humans are social creatures, what do we actually mean?
What we really mean is humans are a cooperative species. We need each other just to survive. So we've evolved to need each other to help raise our children. If you've ever got children in your life, you know how hard that is. We need to cooperate to socially learn, to learn from each other, because there's so much to learn. And we need to cooperate just to get the food we need, the water we need, the shelter we need. So we need each other actually to do those basic survival things. But beyond that, we need each other because the social connections that we build have a major, major influence on your mental and physical health, on your longevity, but also just on your life satisfaction. So we have this visceral need to be with each other.
Well, you mentioned social learning, which we'll come on to because I think that'll be particularly relevant for our listeners today. But can you just tell us, why are these relationships so important to us?
Because at the most basic level, you wouldn't survive without other people in your life. You know, if you were a helpless baby and you were simply left to deal with that on your own, you wouldn't get very far. So from the very moment we're born, we are relying on other people to raise us, to teach us, to keep us safe all the way through our lives. And even if as an adult you think you're an island and you can cope on your own, if you just think of the number of people you cooperate with, even if you actually don't really know them, let's say you get a supermarket delivery, or you watch something on the telly that's teaching you about your health, whatever it might be, you are relying on other humans to give you that information, to pick and pack that food and deliver it to your door. So as a human, you actually cannot survive without having some sort of cooperative relationship with somebody else. But beyond that, actually, most of us do have very, very close social relationships based on love, for example, with our family, with our friends, with our partners going forward. So as a species, we actually literally do not exist without that.
Oh, wow. And so does that mean for students, let's say, who are studying, if they had a study buddy, for instance, would that be more beneficial, like with the social learning aspect?
Absolutely. I think because I'm not an accountant, but I imagine what you're learning is probably pretty complex. And because it's complex, we will approach it in different ways. People learn in different ways and people bring different things out of what they're learning. So we know that actually if you learn as a group, it's much, much easier because you see different perspectives, you suggest different ways of learning something. But also just simply being in that group lowers your stress levels. And we know that you learn much, much better if you have lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol in your system. And simply by being with those people, maybe having a laugh, supporting each other, you're producing lots of lovely social hormones. And social hormones are really, really good at counteracting cortisol.
And that's great because you've referenced hormones there. So I was going to ask you what's actually happening in our brains and what chemicals are being released when we're socializing.
Oh, so there are three key chemicals that are involved when we interact with other people. They're oxytocin, dopamine, and beta endorphin. And I think most people have heard of oxytocin. It's known as the cuddle hormone. But actually, it's released in any situation when we're interacting with another person. It's released most strongly through touch, but it can also be released simply by being in proximity to someone. And oxytocin is really clever because what it does is it actually quietens the fear center of your brain, which really helps if you're nervous or if you're stressed. And it makes you much, much more confident. And that's why it's known as sort of the social bonding hormone, because it makes us more confident about talking to other people. And then we have dopamine. And dopamine's really great because that's your hormone of motivation. So when you're with people, you get a lovely hit of dopamine and you're just generally more motivated to do things in your life. So that's why sometimes if we haven't seen people for a bit, we kind of think that a sofa is a safe place to be. But actually, once you're out with those people, you suddenly feel that real kick of wanting to achieve something. So we get dopamine as well. It's a general reward chemical. And then we get sort of the king of the bonding hormone. Now that's beta endorphin. And beta endorphin is an opiate. So it's a little bit like heroin or morphine, but it's produced by your body and it makes you feel really euphoric, makes you feel really warm, really calm, and actually just really open to being with other people. But in a situation where you might be with a group of fellow students, for example, it's really good because it's released by lots of different behaviours that we do in social groups. So, for example, by laughing, by chatting, by just touching somebody's arm. So probably if you're studying in a group and maybe you have a little bit of a laugh while you're doing it, you're getting a lovely hit of beta endorphin. And all of those are going to really work against any stress you feel in your body or any cortisol that's in your system.
I love that you have these amazing chemical reactions happening in your brain that just make you feel great and also help you reduce stress. It sounds
Yeah.
like being around people is a thing we should be doing more of.
Absolutely, yeah.
But Anna, I suppose we live in a society now where we have so much technology. I know I have my phone, I have my tablet, my laptop, so we tend to communicate more through devices now. So I'm just wondering, with these amazing chemicals that you're referring to, and you mentioned touch earlier as well. Obviously, I can't touch anyone through my screen, not yet anyway. Is it the same? Is it achieving the same effect by communicating virtually?
It really depends what medium you use. So no, if you're simply chatting to someone on a WhatsApp group or you're texting them, for example, I'm afraid not. No. These hormones are generally released by your senses being stimulated. So at the very least, you need to hear someone's voice. If you can see them as well, then you're also getting that visual input. So what I say to people is if you can't be in a room with somebody, the best thing you can do is set up a video call. Because then you're going to get the most sensory input that you can, and therefore you will get a release of these hormones. It's not going to be as powerful as it is if you're in the room with somebody, because that's how our brain has evolved to be social. But at least if you get some visual stimulation, you get some auditory stimulation, you can see the person moving, you can hear their voice, then you are going to get at least something. So if you're going to set up a learning group, if you can bear being on the screen, then try and make it like a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting or something like that.
Oh, wow. Because actually, I'm just thinking about COVID and how that kind of forced everyone to be on Zoom meetings endlessly and transition to sort of conference calls. I know I struggled with that initially, but it's great to know that sort of having a visual, if it's a Zoom call, that can still help. Now, just sticking with the theme of technology, how do you think that's actually influenced relationships in general?
It's weird. In one sense, it's good. I think it's allowed, particularly those relationships which are long distance, to be easier to manage. So, you can get in touch with people who are at the other side of the world so much easier now. And that's really great. But it has been a really big downside. I think we are, as humans, we love shiny new stuff. So we got this shiny new tools of being able to communicate with our phones. And we kind of dived in. And maybe we thought that they were able to replace completely seeing people in person, and we could maintain our relationships just by doing that. We know from studies that's not true. If you just maintain a relationship in that way, it's going to decay much, much faster than it would if you, for example, tried to see someone in person. So because you're not getting the bonding hormones in most of the mediums, we do see this degradation in the quality of the relationship. You're not getting the positive feedback that you get from actually seeing somebody in person, and that's going to affect your mental health in particular. So what we say to people is use them as a tool. They're good as an organizing tool. They're good as when you want to talk to a whole group of people, they're really, really helpful. But particularly those really intimate one-to-one relationships, they're not so great at managing those. And it's if you can be in the room with somebody, then really that's going to be much more valuable to you than just sending a WhatsApp or something like that.
Well, that's great to know, because I'm just thinking about social media as well, and how, certainly for the generation now, that WhatsApp is the way that they do communicate. And we see, a lot of students trying to set up WhatsApp study groups, or we have Facebook study groups. So would the advice here be, try and keep it face to face if possible?
Yeah. I mean, if you can, and I understand that can be logistically quite difficult, if you can, keep it face to face, because believe me, you will get much more of a boost from doing that than you would even on a Zoom call. But if you can't, then if you can bear it, and I know we all get uncomfortable on Zoom calls, we spend our whole time looking at ourselves and thinking, oh, but if you can bear it, then try and do it with a visual medium and being able to hear that person as well, because otherwise whilst you are getting support in a very practical way on a WhatsApp group, you're not getting that support for your mental health. And that's really the benefit of social interaction.
I hear you. Maybe thinking about voice notes then on WhatsApp as well. That could potentially be,
yeah.
Or you can send a quick little video note even.
Absolutely. Even something like that is better than simply relying on text.
Noted. And actually, whilst we stick with technology, I just want to ask about artificial intelligence. I feel like it's so mainstream at the moment, and just thinking about tools like ChatGPT. What's your sort of views and opinions on sort of artificial intelligence and how that's kind of affecting human relationships?
In my sphere, we are nervous about artificial intelligence, because my area of work is very much about the benefits of true human social connection. And studies have shown that if we get somebody, for example, to interact with a humanoid robot, so something that even looks reasonably human, the areas of the brain which light up when we interact with a human, which is your prefrontal cortex, don't activate at all. So we do not recognize this being as being human. Now, if I gave you a dog to interact with, that would light up. So you get even less of the social benefits from that than you would from hugging your dog. So it concerns us, because if we're going to replace human interaction with AI interaction, again, you are not going to get what ultimately is the benefit of social interaction, which is all those lovely chemicals and that really great impact on your health. So for us in our particular area of research, it's very, very concerning that people are suggesting that an AI-based bot or whatever it might be able to replace true human connection, because it really, it's just, the human brain has been evolving for millions of years to be a social tool. And we certainly don't believe that you can program that into a robot. I mean, I interviewed someone for one of my books who said the current robot, social robot, can't even do what your dog can do.
Oh, wow.
So, we're a long way off anything like empathy or trust or reciprocity or all those things that are associated with social interaction ever being programmed into a robot.
Yeah, and I do keep hearing that artificial intelligence can't really think for itself like a human does. It's just pulling information from lots of data that it has in its system, and that's probably not the technical way to describe it, but you get the point I'm making.
Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned the hormones that are being released in the body when we have these social connections. So how do relationships then help us face challenges or help us overcome challenges that we might encounter? And I'm just thinking about my own personal experience when I was struggling with exams and I felt a real overwhelm, especially when I was studying, that actually speaking up ultimately did help. And it's that saying of a problem shared is a problem halved. So can you talk to us a little bit about how relationships help with challenges?
They help in various ways. So if we look at sort of we call it a social network. So the group of people around you who support you are known as your social network. And if we see how people are embedded in that social network, first of all, just the practical help. So, silly things like if you're really tired at the end of the day studying, someone cooking you a meal or somebody, I don't know, doing your washing or whatever it might be. That's you get just general practical help from being in a social network. And that's really, really important. You get help from, yes, as you say, sharing a problem with a fellow student and getting a different perspective on it. But the real benefit is the fact that you are going to get this amazing health benefit from being in that situation. So even if it's nothing to do with being in a learning group, if while you're studying, you take a break and you simply just spend some time with somebody you love, whether it be family, friends, whatever it might be, you are going to get a lot of the lovely bonding chemicals. They are going to relax your body. They're going to do a lot for your mental health. They underpin your immune system, for example. So you're much less likely to get ill at that critical point when you're trying to study and you're trying to work towards an exam. So those are the benefits of being social. It underpins your health. It's going to make you feel amazing. You're going to get that social learning support from other people. You know, they might even be able to teach you something you don't know. And ultimately, just the practical stuff that, there's somebody maybe at home or a neighbour or anybody who's just going to do those little things in life that make it easier for you to focus on what you need to focus on.
I love that you mentioned that, you can have somebody maybe helping you out in the house to cook you a meal or something. I know when I was at university, I often used to love coming back home, especially during the revision period, because my mum would do my laundry and she'd cook for me. And it's little things like that that really do help it and, just help you focus on the studies, I guess, like you say. Just circling back to a point we made earlier about technology and social media, which is obviously so rife right now in society. Everyone uses it. There's also that feeling of individuals feeling more isolated, because although it's making us feel more connected, are we actually really more connected? So, what happens when we feel isolated?
So what's happening when you feel isolated is several things, because when we look at social connection, there is the neurochemical basis of social connection, but there's also the psychological basis of social connection. So loneliness is a psychological condition. And as humans, and I think we all realised it during COVID, first of all, a lot of people's mental health suffered, but also, I don't know whether you experienced it, I certainly did. You actually had like a physical craving to be with the people you loved. And that underpins some forms of loneliness. But that is actually because you are not getting that nurturing neurochemistry from being with them. And when we don't get that, we actually go into opiate withdrawal. Now, because beta endorphin is an opiate, in the same way that, if you can become addicted to morphine, you actually become addicted to the people you're in love with, because when you're with them, you get a hit of beta endorphin. When you're away from them, you go into withdrawal. And that's a very simple mechanism that keeps us together. But when you actually can't physically be with the people that are your source of opiates, it becomes very painful. It becomes painful psychologically, but it also becomes painful actually physiologically, because beta endorphin underpins your pain system. So all those aches and pains that you're kind of used to in life have been covered up because you're in a relationship suddenly reappear. So you've got psychological withdrawal going on, and you've also got physiological withdrawal. And that's why loneliness, isolation can feel so incredibly heavy, so incredibly painful, because you are actually going through this major chemical withdrawal experience. And because we are so used to having people in our lives, we actually subsume people into our identity. So I don't know how you describe yourself, but, I'm an anthropologist and I'm a keen gardener and I like cooking. But actually, if I was to define myself really, it's mostly by my relationships. So, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a mum, I'm a wife, I'm a dog owner. And those are all relationships. And when we don't see the people who are in our world, actually part of our identity disappears. And that, again, can be quite hard to deal with. So whilst we think we're connecting on social media, because we're not actually doing it the way our brains evolved to do it, which is in the room, you're not truly, as far as your brain is concerned, connecting at all. It doesn't understand screens. It doesn't understand text. Writing evolved about, 4,000 years ago. So it's, it's in evolutionary time, it's nothing. And I think that's why, even though we think we have 500 friends on Facebook, we can feel very, very lonely.
Wow. And that's really interesting to know, because you sort of mentioned the point about during COVID. And I felt like during COVID, I turned to technology a lot. And actually that made me feel more empty. And there was a point where I just had Zoom fatigue, because I was doing birthday parties on Zoom and you're doing FaceTime calls. And I'm like, God damn it, I just want to see my family now. I just want to see my friends. So yeah, it's interesting that you...
Well, also, I think part of that is because when your brain doesn't understand the medium of Zoom, it doesn't understand screens, it doesn't understand this thing in front of it. And so it's having to work incredibly hard, even though it's taking in sensory information. Whilst you're an absolute, king or queen at sensory information in person, I'm taking in so much information from you. My brain is churning away and spitting out lots of stuff that's really helping me. It's much harder for it to do that on Zoom. So it's actually having to work very, very hard. And that's why you feel tireder, because cognitively you are tireder, because you're having to work so hard.
I definitely struggle with kind of picking up on cues when I'm on Zoom. So I'm glad that you've kind of validated that it's not me. It's just my brain's just not able to deal with it as best, as if it was in a face-to-face conversation. So then just coming back to, obviously we know isolation isn't great for our body and mind. What can people do when they're feeling isolated?
Obviously, the easiest thing to do is reach out and spend some time with somebody. but some people find that very hard. Some of us are more sociable than others. What we say is if you can't be social for whatever reason, what we try to do then is ask you to do behaviours which mimic the neurochemistry released when you're social. So there are ways you can, for example, release dopamine. There are ways you can release beta endorphin without actually being with somebody else. So dopamine is your general reward chemical. So anything that you get that sensation of enjoyment from has released dopamine. So even if it's eating a tub of ice cream and you feel great, that's dopamine.
Sounds like my kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or, hugging a puppy, whatever it might be. So you can produce dopamine by just finding something that you enjoy doing. Beta endorphin is actually reasonably easy to produce on your own. It's produced by exercise. I think people who get runner's high or gym addicts know that euphoric feeling you feel, and the fact that you can become addicted to exercise, that's beta endorphin. So, any form of exercise can do that. Something like massage. So, touch is the most powerful release of social hormones that there is. So you will get a lovely hit of oxytocin and beta endorphin if you have a massage. Dancing and singing release beta endorphin. So if you just dance around your kitchen singing out of tune to something on the radio, that will release beta endorphin. The great joy of being with other people, though, is those levels of beta endorphin and oxytocin and dopamine are multiplied many-fold if you are actually with somebody else. So you can mimic it, but you're just not going to get the hit. It's not going to be as big a hit than if you do it socially. But there are behaviours you can do to mimic it.
Well, it's great to know that you've mentioned things like eating a tub of ice cream might just help me. Maybe avoid eating too much of the ice cream, but also exercise. I know that's something that can be great. And certainly for me, when I was studying and I was stuck on a problem, I often found that just going out for a walk near the local park helped. And that walking is a great form of exercise as well, isn't it?
It is. No, I find that completely. If I'm stuck on something, I spend a lot of time writing. And if I get to a dead end, if I go for a walk, it's amazing how suddenly everything sort of clarifies itself. And that is partly the exercise. That's the oxygenation of the brain and just letting it have a little rest as well. But it is a lot to do with the fact that you've produced beta endorphin, and that just brings that clarity.
Oh, thank you so much. And I feel like I've understood a lot about myself as well and just the importance of social connection. So obviously for some of our students, they might be with a tuition provider. And when that's the case, they tend to be in person in a face-to-face class, as was the situation for me. And so I was able to build connections that way. But granted, there'll be students who are also self-studying and they might be thinking, right, where do I go to form these connections? How can I get a study buddy? And yes, we do have forums ACCA offers to connect with other students. You've got things like Facebook pages. But what would your advice be to these students who are self-studying and want to find connection with other students?
Well, it sounds like the Facebook page is a good place to start. So maybe set up a WhatsApp group. That's a really good way to introduce yourself, to start to get to know people. And it's a great way to ask practical questions. Obviously, that's very easy. But I would say if you can be brave enough, once you set up that WhatsApp group, once you've talked to people on there, if you can encourage people to have a video call or even meet up if somebody's nearby, then you really will be reaping the benefits of having those connections. So maybe use the WhatsApp group as a sort of a jumping off point to actually then maybe expand that a bit and get that sensory experience and do the video call.
So just thinking about students who are working and studying and might be thinking, I don't have time for this. What would your advice be there?
Okay, if you want to maximise your time and you want to do it in as short a period of time as possible, be in the same room, be in a group if you can, and do one of our lovely endorphin releasing activities together. Because what we know is you can do an activity on your own that produces endorphins, like exercise or dancing or singing or whatever that may be, and it will give you an endorphin hit, and that's lovely. But the bizarre thing is, as humans, if we do one of those activities together in what we call synchrony, that release of endorphins for that whole group is ramped up 10, 20-fold. It's an amazing phenomenon, and it's actually what bonds groups together. So what I would say is, if exercise is your thing, go to an exercise class, do it all together with your friends. You're going to get a massive hit of beta endorphin. If that's not your thing, go out dancing, join a choir, something like that. Or even if you've got like those 15 minutes and you've come together as a study group and you're having a cup of tea or whatever, if you can convince people, either put something on the radio and sing along to it or have a bit of a dance around the kitchen together. I know it sounds silly, but believe me, you will get this multifold increase in beta endorphin and you'll get all the positive effects, but in a really short period of time.
I'm just thinking about learning a TikTok dance over that 15 minutes. Why not, right?
Why not? Exactly. And then film it.
So before we wrap up, just wanted to ask you, what 3 strategies do you have to make the most out of social connections?
I would say make them face-to-face. Okay. Try to do something in your social connections that's going to generate a bit of beta endorphin, a bit of oxytocin, a bit of dopamine. So, if you can, have a laugh. I mean, even if it's having to go to a comedy club together, do that. That's absolutely great. Go and do exercise together, go and dancing together, anything like that produces it. And whilst it's important to be social, obviously when you're working, it's also important to remember to be social in your downtime as well. That really, truly relaxing time. And I will also say, if you aren't a particularly sociable person, and we're not all particularly sociable, it doesn't have to be with a human. We get some of the release of some of these chemicals from your pet dog. Or if you've got a cat, hug your cat. All of these things will produce beta endorphin. So if people aren't your thing, then maybe turn to something nice and warm and furry.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this conversation. That's it from this episode of On Your Marks. Thank you, Anna, for talking with me today. For more information about ACCA exams, you can go to www.acccaglobal.com/exams. See you next time. I'm Kritika Adatia, and this has been On Your Marks.